My name is Jeff Garmany. I'm a lecturer in the King's Brazil Institute. And my guest today is Mr. Michael Palin. Mr. Palin is a writer, comedian, traveler, and television presenter. It's likely you know him from his work with Monty Python, as well as other films such as A Fish Called Wanda and Ripping Yarns. And over the past several years, Mr. Palin has established himself as one of the top BBC travel presenters. I was wondering, Mr. Palin, if you could, to begin things here, could you talk about some of the things that really surprised you when you were in Brazil? You've traveled all over the world, and what I'm curious to know is what surprised you when you got there?
Well, if I can turn it on its head, I really travelled to be surprised. I don't know what I'm going to find. Oddly enough, I got to Brazil and I thought, this is just like the fantasy of Brazil we all have. The beaches are long and sand is beautiful, a lovely climate, the people are very relaxed, there's a lot of music, a lot of noise. It took me quite a while before I thought, what is different about this place? What makes this place unusual compared to anywhere else and anything else that's been in the back of my mind? And I suppose that it took a while of being in Brazil before I realized there were certain elements which did surprise me. One, I suppose, is that the multiplicity of people there. I mean, it is a huge country. It's the 5th biggest country in the world. And you find immigrants from every single part of the world. An awful lot from Africa because there was a huge influx of slaves into Brazil. And they've actually integrated pretty well, rather differently from America. They didn't have quite the same segregationist problems they had there. So there's the African, and then you've also got Portuguese, that's a fairly small element, but they were the ruling power. Then you've got Germans, Italians, Japanese. And the extraordinary thing was not that all these people were scattered over this vast country, but they all, with one exception, which were the Germans in the very south, feel themselves Brazilian. And I thought, that's extraordinary. I thought there was one kind of Brazilian I would see, and it's not like that. There are very, very many, but they do believe themselves to be Brazilian.
You've traveled to nearly every continent at this point, and you've seen firsthand how nations like Brazil are becoming world powers. In your opinion, do you think that young people fully understand how much the world is evolving? Young people here in the UK, and then maybe also young people in countries like Brazil that you've traveled to?
And I think there's very much an awareness now, as opposed to when I was young, that we are not the centre of the world, that the centre is shifting. I was brought up to believe that was the end of the British Empire. Those days, all the map was pink and red. And now, of course, we're not the centre, and the centre is moving around. I think people are quite interested in the new BRIC countries who are going to be the leaders, who are going to be the power players in the future.
Mm-hmm. Now, that segues into this next question, which is, what more can universities do to help prepare students for travel to and potentially working in or working with countries like Brazil, India, China, maybe Russia, the BRIC? And do you feel that universities like this one actually help to prepare students for those sorts of engagements?
Well, certainly with what's happening here at King's, I think you are trying to prepare people and get people interested and involved in emerging countries. My feeling is that the best way to do it is to get people together physically, face to face. I think there's nothing better than actually talking to people from the country. You can see all the figures in the world, you can see all the arguments, you can be exposed to all the sort of the news, the changes, the geopolitics of it all. But actually, I've found the best way of learning about another country and what it's like is to listen to the people from that country. So I think that's it's a very important thing that can happen here is that actually is sort of interchange of ideas between people from all over the world and people from Brazil, and get them to talk about their country. And I think that is the human angle which draws young people in particularly. The other important thing is, of course, to travel to the country. It's a good thing to meet people here in London, discuss, debate with people from the country. Better still, to meet the people in the country itself. And I think that's would be very, very important to encourage people to travel and see the country for themselves and get an independent view of it. I'm a great believer, the brain, the education being to do with sort of your own encounters, your own experience, your own feelings. Don't just take it from somebody else. Don't just look at the facts and figures and say, I've worked it all out. Your own experience will be what really you remember most of all. If I can ask you a question, Jeff, why is the work of the Brazil Institute going to make a difference, and how will it make a difference?
The Brazil Institute it's unique actually in so many ways. It's one of a kind in that there are lots of area studies programs in universities around the world. There are very few like the Brazil Institute or like the global institutes more generally here at King's that actually take very seriously very contemporary events, the way the world is actually changing right now, beyond just sort of an area studies program. What an institute like the Brazil Institute does is it starts from where is growth happening and what changes are actually occurring right now in the world, and how do we think about those changes. And so I think one of the things that an institute like the Brazil Institute does is it works to bring students and faculty and the community together. Being right here in London, it's an amazing setting from which to work, and it's also a multidisciplinary institute. So it works to sort of encompass questions from the social sciences and humanities, bringing questions of Brazilian history and contemporary development together to really try and create a unique sort of environment, I think, for students.
But I'm not quite sure how engaged young Brazilians in Brazil are with the rest of the world. They sort of seem to be a little wary of it. From your perspective, here at the Brazil Institute, what's your feeling about that?
They're interested in Brazil, both Brazilians and non-Brazilians alike, but they're especially interested in the way that Brazil engages with the rest of the world right now, and the way that as Brazil's economy grows, as the way that the country sort of rises to prominence, how will Brazil engage politically, economically, socially, culturally with the rest of the world? Certainly, events like the World Cup and the Olympics are sort of major focal points for this.
Do you think for its size, fifth biggest country in the world by area, sixth biggest economy, do you think it's neglected in interest?
That's a great question. I do. I think it's not just that it's neglected in interest. It gets categorized. It gets put into to little boxes, so to speak. And so people think of Brazil and they think of football. They think of the beach. They think of carnival, and they don't think of the sixth largest economy on the planet. They don't think of one of the better sort of diplomatic powers in the world. I mean, Brazil is an excellent peacekeeper, so to speak, right? All the countries that border Brazil, look at how few wars Brazil has had. And Brazil is excellent, not just in terms of sort of growing its economy currently, but also engaging with a number of different international actors, keeping peace not just within its own region, but elsewhere in the world. And then I think also certainly, as your series actually points out, there are rising very important companies in Brazil right now that I think sometimes people just happen to overlook. They don't necessarily think of those companies as being Brazilian.
Yeah.
And if they did, I think people would certainly realize the sort of the larger importance, so to speak, or the classic importance that Brazil currently has.